Galactic Standard Date. Year 11356. Day 96. Sol Standard Date. 4th of the 8th, 3267. Bastos brought the once lively queen up to his chest level, before turning her onto her stomach and releasing his grip. She was too far gone to struggle once he had released her, so she just laid limp on his open hand as he readjusted to get a hold of her wings. He slid her wings through his knuckles and clenched his fist before quickly tearing them out. The queen winced a bit and whimpered, but otherwise didn't make any moves. The pain wasn't even remotely comparable to what she had just gone through. It quickly burned the holes in her back that once held wings to stop the bleeding that had started, and then flipped her back over to face him. "Do you regret your actions yet? And if so, why do you regret them?" Her eyes focused a little bit as she thought.
I do regret it. I regret acting so heinously towards you, my lordship.
He sighed and glared at her. "No. Do not regret behaving that way towards me. Regret behaving that way towards your people. A leader is one who puts their people first, not one who uses their people to make their lives easier, or to live out their own depraved fantasies. What you did was not lead, you ruled. What you should regret is not leading your people. I will now let them decide what to do with you. I will, however, be choosing your next leader myself." Her gaze dropped as she ruminated on his words. Her mind was dull from the half year of torture, but Bastos had made sure that she would still be cognizant enough to speak to him and accept the punishment doled out by her own people. Satisfied, he began opening a rift back to the palace. Morelia stared dumbfounded as 1 second Bastos had left with the queen in tow, and then less than a minute later he came back with a vastly different being in tow. It wasn't a chance she could see happening in mere seconds. Her wings were gone and she looked absolutely ragged. Scarring could be seen in overlapping patterns that seemed as if it had been healed and scarred over and over until her skin was mostly made out of scar. Her abdomen's carapace was pitted and gouged throughout, and it looked as if she had been literally torn apart. But the biggest change was in her eyes, her very demeanor. She seemed like a completely different being. Gone was the blatant pride, gone was her furious rage, and gone was her will. Morelia gulped as she looked at Bastos. She turned back towards Amaranth and whispered,
"How did he turn the queen into such a mess in seconds?"
Amaranth innocently smiled at her and said, "Oh no, hon, it wasn't so paltry an amount of time as seconds. More realistically, she spent around 6 Earth months in there, so around 4,000 hours, give or take a few hundred." Morelia went slack-jawed as she stared back at the queen, who was now kowtowing in front of the huddled-up group of servants. The servants kept shaking at the very sound of her voice, regardless of her current appearance. It was hard to forget the fear that was ingrained into your very being from birth. Bastos sighed, walked over to the servants who were literally shaking in fear, and he knelt down to be a little less imposing. "Do not be afraid. I am not here to hurt you. The queen here will never hurt you again. You are free to do as you wish. I will set up a new leadership for your people, so that this doesn't happen again." The servants stared between him and the queen in disbelief for a few seconds, before Servant 367, who had previously been the one suffocating between the queen's legs, cautiously stood up and watched the queen's reaction closely. She just kept bowing, nothing else. There was almost no reaction whatsoever, and that incensed the servant. Her heart filled with rage.
"You, after all this time, after all my friends that you've killed and tortured."
Tears filled her eyes, and she trembled with a mixture of the previous fear and her newfound rage. She took a shaky step closer to the queen before she reeled back her leg and let out a scream of rage as she connected her foot with the queen's face. They were malnourished, and thus had little strength. The hit may not have hurt the queen very much, but it felt like she had just conquered the world. Her newfound strength surged through 367, and she cackled with glee as her heart pumped furiously. She looked back to the other servants with wild eyes.
"It is time. We must tear her apart. We must avenge our family. Take your vengeance with me now."
Bastos turned away and left the room with Amaranth and Morelia. The servants, somewhat incensed by the fact that she faced no retribution for kicking their monarch, cautiously took a step forward before lightly kicking the queen. 8 different servants who had spent their entire lives raised to serve some cruel mistress were now released from the shackles that held them back. They quivered in anticipation as their kicks grew more powerful. The queen simply accepted her fate, as she was already broken. No amount of pain compared to what Bastos had given her. The kiss could hardly be felt, When one clawed her back and drew blood, she didn't care. When they decided she tasted good and started tearing into her body with their jaws, that's when it started to hurt. She clenched her fists as a bite was taken out of her side and stifled a grunt of pain. She held it in until they had managed to pull her legs off. She finally let out a scream of pain and turned to see the servants gleefully chomping down on her flesh as he bled out. One grabbed her chin and turned her face to look into his eyes. "My queen, I want to watch as the light leaves your eyes. I won't be able to sleep until I am sure you are gone. Please, just die." The queen's vision was fading, and she stared blankly.
"I have accepted my punishment. Just kill me."
The servant clenched his jaw and wrapped his bony fingers around her throat. The other servants stopped eating and locked eyes with the queen as she struggled to breathe. Her face started to turn blue as she weakly scratched at the arms holding her throat. Tears fell involuntarily as she struggled until she finally went slack. The servant let his hands shakily release their grip from her throat before he stood up and screamed. The swell of emotions he felt culminating into that one scream. His scream was followed by 7 others. 367 calmed down and shakily turned to where the body of her sister lay. This sister had been killed on the throne simply because the queen was in a bad mood. She walked over to her chilling corpse and wrapped her up into a hug before quietly sobbing to herself.